The monitor screamed. Not a beep. A long, flat, mechanical scream that cut through the hospital hallway like a knife through thin paper. Oren Vale didn't understand what the sound meant. He was 6 years old. But he understood the way the nurses moved. Fast. Too fast. They weren't walking anymore. They were running. A paramedic shoved past him with a cart full of equipment, and Oren pressed his small back against the cold wall, clutching the stuffed wolf his father had sewn for him 2 birthdays ago. One of the ears was coming loose. His papa kept promising to fix it. He hadn't fixed it yet. "Sir, we need you to step aside. That's my dad." The nurse didn't slow down. Nobody slowed down. 2 more paramedics rounded the corner pushing a gurney, and on that gurney was Arden Vale, 31 years old, translator, the only person in Oren's entire world, and his face was the color of old paper. His lips were slightly open. His chest moved, but barely. Oren ran beside the gurney until a second nurse caught him by the shoulders. "Sweetheart, you have to wait out here. That's my dad." His voice broke at the edges. "I said that's my dad." "I know, baby. I know. But right now the doctors need room." The surgery doors swung shut, and Oren stood alone in the hallway with his stuffed wolf and the sound of his own breathing. The waiting area was wide and cold. White tile floors, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. A television mounted high on the wall played a news channel with the volume too low to hear. People sat in rows of plastic chairs. Some stared at their phones. One woman rocked a baby quietly. An old man read a folded newspaper. Nobody looked at Oren. He found an empty chair near the window and sat down with his wolf pressed against his chest, watching the front doors like his father might walk back through them any second. He wouldn't, but Oren kept watching anyway. That was when the man in the gray suit walked in. He wasn't a patient. His shoes were too clean. His watch caught the light in a way that said money. Serious money, the kind Oren had never been close to but had seen from a distance on the faces of men who spoke to his father sometimes. Men who called at odd hours. Men whose names his father never said out loud. The man in the gray suit spoke to the woman at the front desk with a kind of easy confidence that meant he expected to be listened to. The nurse leaned in, nodded twice. Her posture changed completely. Then the man glanced around the waiting room with the slow, lazy look of someone checking a space he already owned. His gaze landed on the surgery wing. He said something to the nurse again, quietly, but Oren was close enough to catch 2 words. He pointed toward the surgery wing and said, voice low but not low enough, "That Omega, the one they just brought in." He adjusted his cufflinks without looking up. "Honestly, fat, ugly. These people come in here expecting top care, and they haven't even put a dime into this hospital." The nurse didn't respond. She just looked down at her clipboard. That was the moment. The silence that followed felt thick. Wrong. The kind of silence that happens when everyone in a room hears something cruel and decides it's easier to pretend they didn't. Oren's chest went hot. His grip tightened on the wolf. His papa's voice came back to him clearly. Low, steady, the kind of voice that told bedtime stories and also told the truth. Words hit people in places they can't show you, Oren. That's why you always choose them carefully. The boy stood up. His sneakers squeaked once on the tile. He walked across the waiting room, past the woman with the baby, past the old man with the newspaper, past the nurse who still hadn't looked up from her clipboard, and he stopped 3 feet from the man in the gray suit. He tilted his chin up. His voice came out louder than he planned. "Did you just call my dad fat and ugly?" The whole waiting room went still. Every head turned. The man in the gray suit looked down. And for one sharp second, something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, just surprise. That a child had the nerve. Hi viewers. Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up for someone you love? Even when you were scared? Drop it in the comments, I want to know. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words never came out. Because at that exact moment, the hospital's front doors opened wide. Cold air rushed in, and 3 men walked through together. Same height, same build, same face. 3 of them, identical. The room didn't just go quiet. It went a different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when people recognize something dangerous and their bodies decide to go very, very still. The man in the gray suit forgot Oren existed. His face changed. The nurse at the front desk stood up straighter. The old man with the newspaper slowly lowered it. And Oren, still standing in the middle of the floor with his stuffed wolf and his chin still raised, looked up at the 3 men. One of them was already looking back. Straight at him. Not past him. Not through him. At him. And the look in that man's eyes was something Oren couldn't name yet. Not anger. Not amusement. Something else entirely. Something that felt like recognition. The man closest to the door had a neck tattoo. Oren noticed it first. A dark geometric pattern that climbed from his collar and ended just below his jaw. He was in a black coat. All 3 of them were. They moved the same way too. Not rushed, not slow, just steady. Like men who had never once needed to prove they belonged somewhere. The one with the neck tattoo looked at the man in the gray suit. Then back at Oren. Then at the man again. His expression didn't change. That was the part that made everyone in the waiting room hold still. No reaction meant no signal. And no signal meant anything could happen next. The man in the gray suit straightened his jacket. He cleared his throat. Tried to recover the easy confidence he'd walked in with. "Gentlemen." His voice came out almost steady. "I wasn't expecting." "We know." Short. Flat. The man with the neck tattoo said it without even turning his head fully. His attention had already moved. Back to the boy. He crossed the waiting room floor in 5 even steps and crouched down in front of Oren. Not towering over him. Not grabbing him. Just down. Eye level. Up close his face was sharp and serious, the kind of face that didn't do small talk. But his voice when he spoke was quieter than Oren expected. "Why are you protecting him like that?" Oren's throat tightened. His knuckles were still white around the stuffed wolf. He thought about not answering. He thought about stepping back. He did neither. "Because he protects me." The man stayed crouched. Didn't blink for a second. Then something crossed his face. Fast, barely there. Like a light turning on in a room that hadn't seen light in a long time. He stood. Looked at his brothers. Nothing was said between them, but something passed through the air like a current. The second man, slightly leaner, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of stillness that felt calculated, turned toward the nurse's station. The third man said nothing. He was watching the boy, not in a cold way, in a careful way, like he was cataloging something important. Oren didn't know their names yet. He would learn them later. Kaler-driven, neck tattoo, first to speak, first to move, the one who asked the question. Soren-driven, the glasses, the numbers, the quiet financial brain behind the operation. Velas-driven, the last one, the watcher, the one who noticed what the others occasionally missed. All 3 of them ran the Driven organization, which was a polite way of saying they controlled most of the legitimate business licenses in the city, and several things that weren't quite legitimate. Everyone knew the name. Most people in this hospital knew the face, which was why, right now, the man in the gray suit had shifted 6 inches toward the exit. Soren stepped up to the front desk. He placed a card down. "We'd like to confirm the status of the patient who just came into emergency surgery. Arden Vale." The nurse blinked. Are you family, sir?" "Associates." Soren's voice had no warmth in it. "Recent ones." There was a pause. A small, complicated pause. Then she picked up the phone. Oren watched all of this. He didn't fully understand it, but he understood the effect. The man in the gray suit, who 3 minutes ago had spoken about his father like he was something stuck to the bottom of a shoe, was now standing by the far wall saying absolutely nothing. Not laughing anymore. not adjusting his cufflinks. Just standing there hoping to not be noticed. Oren looked at him for a long moment, then looked away. He didn't feel satisfied. He just felt tired and scared, because none of this brought his father back through those surgery doors. Kaler noticed the shift in the boy's face. He walked back over and crouched again. That same steady move, nothing abrupt about it. "What's your name?" "Oren." "How old are you, Oren?" "6. A pause. "And a half." Something at the corner of Kaler's mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. Something smaller. "The half matters?" "My dad says the half always matters." This time the something not quite a smile stayed a little longer. He studied the boy, the stuffed wolf, the worn sneakers, the eyes that were red at the edges but hadn't let a single tear fall in front of anyone. "Has anyone come to be with you?" Oren shook his head once. "Is there someone we can call?" Another shake. "It's just me and my dad." Kaler held the boy's gaze for one more second. Then he stood and turned toward his brothers. And this time the current that passed between them was different. It had weight to it. Velas looked at the boy still standing in the middle of the floor, small and stubborn, wolf clutched to his chest. Then the surgery doors opened. A doctor stepped out in scrubs. Not to deliver good news. The expression said that clearly. He scanned the waiting room, found Oren, and walked toward him with the careful steps of someone choosing words slowly. He crouched beside the boy and said the thing that broke the room in half. "Your father is still in surgery. But I need to be honest with you, son." He paused. "He might not make it through the night." The sound that came out of Oren was not a scream. It was smaller than that. Worse than that. A single sharp breath, the kind that happens before crying, right at the edge. And then the boy pressed his face into the stuffed wolf and went completely silent, which was somehow harder to hear than any sound. The doctor stood and turned toward the nurse's station to resume updating charts, already moving on to the next crisis. That was how this building worked. Tragedy arrived. Staff adapted. Life kept moving at the same mechanical pace. Oren didn't move. He sat down on the floor where he was standing, right there in the middle of the waiting room. Wolf in his lap, head down. An orderly noticed him and looked away. A woman in the waiting room glanced over, then back at her phone. Nobody moved toward the child. That was the part that settled into the air like something heavy. Not the illness. Not the surgery. The fact that a 6-year-old boy was sitting on a hospital floor alone and 30 adults in the same room had silently agreed it wasn't their problem. Velas was the first of the 3 to move. He didn't rush. He walked over slowly, lowered himself down to the floor with the kind of careful control that said he didn't usually sit on floors, but was choosing to, and sat beside the boy without saying a word. Not touching him. Not telling him it would be okay. Just there. The boy didn't look up, but he also didn't move away. 3 minutes passed like that. At the nurse's station, a woman in a blazer had appeared. Hospital administration. Her name tag read Patterson, and she held a clipboard and spoke in the flat professional tone of someone who processed difficult situations efficiently and personally didn't enjoy them. She spoke to the nurse on duty. "The patient in surgery, the Omega male Vale." She glanced at the board. "His insurance is flagged for secondary review. Until that resolves, he's been scheduled to move to the general ward post-surgery if he stabilizes." The nurse nodded. She had the look of someone who knew what that meant and didn't like it but had no authority to change it. General ward meant fewer monitors, fewer staff, longer response times. For someone recovering from acute pneumonia complicated by sepsis, it meant the difference between catching a turn for the worse and missing it entirely. From across the room, Soren heard the conversation. He pushed his glasses up once. Turned toward Kaler. One word. "No." Kaler pulled out his phone. He made a call. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't use threats. He simply said a name, asked a question, and waited. 30 seconds. He hung up. 7 minutes later, the hospital director, Dr. Emmett Bryce, whose name was on 3 buildings in this facility, came through a side door in a shirt with the collar slightly open like he'd been pulled away from something. He walked directly to the nurse's station. There was a conversation that happened too quietly for most of the room to hear. Patterson's clipboard lowered. Her expression changed. The directive changed with it. Arden Vale would go to intensive care. Private room. Full monitoring. A separate surgical team consulting on his recovery. Not the general ward. No secondary review delay. No more moving the problem patient anywhere. Real power doesn't shout. It simply changes what happens next. Oren didn't know any of this was happening. He was still sitting on the floor next to Valus, head still down, wolf still pressed against his chest. But Valus knew. He kept his eyes forward. Said nothing. Then the boy looked up. His eyes were dry now. Red around the edges, but dry. Is he going to die? Valus didn't flinch from the question. The doctors are working very hard right now. That's not what I asked. A beat. No, it isn't. Oren looked at him, searching. Like he was trying to figure out whether this man was the kind of person who lied to children to make them feel better or the kind who didn't. I need him to be okay, the boy said quietly. Not to Valus particularly, just out loud. Into the room. I know, Valus said. Another silence. Then one of the nurses, a younger one, different from the others, someone who had clearly been watching from across the room, walked over with a cup of juice and a small bag of crackers. She crouched down in front of Oren. You hungry little man? He shook his head. You sure? They're the good kind. Cheddar. A long pause. Then he reached out and took the bag. She gave him a small, real smile and walked back to her station. He didn't open the crackers, but he held them. That small gesture, the juice, the crackers, the one person in the building who moved toward him instead of away, was the thing that finally made his chin tremble. He held it together, barely. And then the doctor who had delivered the news came back through the surgery doors. His expression had changed. A different kind of change. He walked toward a nurse. Stopped. Said something. The nurse's eyebrows lifted. The doctor then moved to the front desk, picked up the chart he'd put down 10 minutes ago, and flipped to a page near the back. He went very still. He looked up, looked across the room. His gaze landed briefly, confused, on the 3 men near the window. Then back at the chart. He read the same line again. Something in Arden Vale's medical file had stopped him cold. The chart stayed in the doctor's hands for a long time. Too long. He read the same section twice. Then once more. His expression wasn't alarmed. It was careful, the way a person looks when they find something that doesn't fit where they're standing. Like finding a key but not knowing yet which door it opens. He closed the chart, set it face down on the counter, and went back through the surgery doors without saying a word to anyone. Soren had watched all of it. He had a way of watching a room that most people never noticed because he never made it obvious. He simply observed, recorded, filed. He leaned slightly toward Kaler. Something in his file. Kaler didn't look at the nurse's station. I saw. You want me to find out what it is? A pause. Not yet. 7 years. That number had been sitting at the back of Kaler's mind since the moment he heard the name come across the desk. Vale. It wasn't a common name. Not in the circles they moved in. 7 years ago they had been different men. Not younger exactly. Just operating differently. Harder. More willing to let situations resolve badly if it meant protecting the organization's position. 7 years ago they had been invited quietly, officially, through 3 layers of trusted intermediaries, to a summit, not a public event, not a conference with name badges and catered lunches. A summit, the kind that happened in a rented floor of a private building with no outside communication and a small team of specialists brought in to manage the details. Translators, legal liaisons, people with clearances and quiet reputations. There had been 6 different factions in the room. Old money, new money, 2 organizations from overseas, a city official who couldn't officially be there, and a translator who had been recommended by 3 separate parties. Arden Vale. He was 24 then. Slight, calm. The kind of professional presence that made high-pressure rooms easier without drawing attention to itself. He had moved between conversations like water, translated not just language but intent, not just words but the spaces between them. 3 times during that summit, Kaler had watched him redirect a conversation that was 5 seconds from becoming a physical confrontation. No drama, no announcement, just precision. By the 2nd day, they were in the same room for 18 hours. By the 3rd day, the tension in the building had shifted. The summit ended without a single casualty. That had not been guaranteed going in. Arden had played a significant role in making it go differently. Afterward, there was a single night. Not planned. Not discussed. One night at the end of something enormous, when the pressure of 3 days finally released and a handful of them sat in a quiet room after everyone else had gone. Arden had stayed. They had talked. Not about the summit. Not about work. Just talked. And then, the morning came and Arden was gone. No goodbye. No note. No contact. His professional record went quiet within the week. He disappeared from the network entirely. Kaler had not thought about it often. Occasionally. On specific nights when the thought arrived before sleep. But not often. Now he was standing in the waiting room of Mercy General Hospital, and a 6-year-old boy with a stuffed wolf had just told him his father was everything to him. And a doctor had looked at a medical chart and gone very, very still. Soren was already on his tablet. Low light, angled away from the room. He pulled Arden Vale's medical history through channels that would not show up on any official record. He read for about 90 seconds. Then he stopped. He read one specific section again. Then he turned the tablet very slightly toward Kaler. One line. Medical annotation. Routine genetic panel. The child's markers. Oren Vale, age 6. Rare double-dominant alpha lineage on the paternal genetic index. Which meant whoever had contributed that genetic material was not only alpha, they were rare. The kind of rare that showed up maybe once in a generation. The kind of rare that was documented in exactly 3 known family lines in the country. One of them was sitting in this waiting room right now. All 3 of them. Kaler didn't move. Soren closed the tablet. Valus, still seated on the floor beside Oren, hadn't looked at them. But he spoke, quietly, just loud enough. Whatever you're reading over there. He didn't turn his head. Handle it carefully. Nobody answered, because there was no answer yet. Because power should never claim a child without truth. And the truth here was still partial, still fragile, still something that could destroy rather than build if it was moved too fast. Oren had stopped eating the crackers halfway through. He was looking at the surgery doors again. Waiting, always waiting. Then he turned. He looked directly at the 3 men near the window. He had been watching them longer than they realized. 6 years old. But his father had raised him to notice things. Why do you keep looking at me like that? Nobody answered immediately. Then Oren's eyes moved to the tablet in Soren's hand. To the screen that was now dark. Something flickered across the boy's face. Young, but not unaware. His voice came out small, careful, like he was asking the thing he was most afraid of. Are you going to take my dad away? Nobody answered. That was what terrified him. Not a no, not a reassurance. Just 3 men exchanging a look that children were not supposed to understand. Oren understood it anyway. He stood up, crackers in one hand, wolf in the other, and he walked away from them, not toward the exit. He didn't know where the exit was, not really. He walked away from the waiting room, past the vending machines, past the restroom sign, around a corner, and down a short hallway that ended in a heavy fire door. He pushed it open. Concrete stairs. The echo of footsteps from somewhere above. He sat down on the second step and pulled the wolf tight against his chest. The door swung slowly shut behind him, and the hallway went quiet. He sat there. The stuffed wolf was missing a button eye. He hadn't noticed that before. Or maybe he had and just not looked at it directly. The cotton around the ear was frayed where the stitching had come loose. His papa had been meaning to fix it. He was gonna fix it when he felt better. He had said that. When I feel better, Oren. Just give me the weekend. That was 3 weekends ago. Oren sat with that for a while. The stairwell smelled like cleaning product and concrete. Nobody came. He thought maybe nobody would. He thought that was fine. He had sat alone in quiet places before. When his papa worked late and the neighbor downstairs fell asleep and the apartment got very still. He was good at quiet. He was good at waiting. He just wasn't sure what he was waiting for anymore. The door opened. He looked up fast. It was Velas. Not Kaler. Not Soren. Velas. The quiet one. He stepped into the stairwell and looked at Oren and didn't say anything right away. He glanced up the stairs. Then back down. Then he walked over. Slowly. And sat down on the step beside him. Same as the waiting room floor. Same unhurried, deliberate choice. No urgency in it. No agenda. Just sitting. Oren didn't tell him to leave. He also didn't speak. A minute passed. Maybe 2. The building's ventilation hummed faintly above them. Somewhere far above them in the stairwell, a door opened and closed. Footsteps faded. Then quiet again. Velas looked at the stuffed wolf. At the loose ear. At the missing eye. His name. A pause. Grayson. How long have you had him? Since I was 3. Oren turned Grayson over once in his hands. My dad made him. Cut up an old sweater. Velas nodded like that was a serious piece of information. Because it was. Your dad make things often? Sometimes. When he can't sleep. A beat. He gets up at night a lot. I hear him. He thinks I don't know, but I do. Velas said nothing. Just listened. That was the thing Oren noticed. He wasn't trying to redirect. He wasn't offering solutions or corrections or better topics. He was just listening. Oren exhaled slowly. I'm not going to cry again. Okay. I already cried once. That's enough for one day. That's a rule. Oren thought about it. My dad doesn't cry in front of people. He says it makes people think you need something. And then they use that. Velas went quiet. The kind of quiet that had weight in it. Your dad told you that? He tells me a lot of things. Another silence. Then Oren turned and looked at him. Really looked. The way children look at adults when they're deciding whether to ask the real question or keep it inside. Everyone leaves eventually. He said it like a fact. Not fishing for contradiction. Just putting it out there. Children understand abandonment better than adults realize. They catalog every departure, every silence, every promise that arrived with an expiration date they could feel coming before anyone else did. Velas held the boy's gaze. Is that something your dad told you? Or something you figured out on your own? Oren looked back at Grayson. Both. A breath. People leave when things get hard. That's just what happens. His voice was too even for a 6-year-old. The only person who never left is my dad. And now he's in there and I can't. The evenness slipped once. Just once. I can't go in there with him. Velas didn't fill the silence immediately. He let it land. Let it mean what it meant. Then he said something simple. No ceremony. No dramatic weight to it. We're not here to take your family. Oren looked at him sideways. How do I know that? You don't. Yet. The honesty of it surprised the boy. His chin came up slightly. My dad says people who tell you exactly what you want to hear usually want something. Your dad's right. So why should I trust you? Velas thought about it genuinely. Not performing thought, actually considering it. You probably shouldn't. Not yet. He met the boy's eyes. But I'm still here. And I'm not asking you for anything. Oren held that, turned it over, looked at the door, then back at Velas. For the first time since his father went through those surgery doors, some of the stiffness in the boy's small shoulders released. Not all of it, but some. He leaned back slightly against the wall, held Grayson against his chest, and exhaled. Velas didn't move, didn't push, didn't ask another question. They sat in the quiet together. Two people at opposite ends of everything: size, age, power, world, sharing the same concrete step. Then the building went dark. Not a flicker, not a brief outage. Total. Every light in the stairwell cut at once. The ventilation stopped. The hum disappeared. And in the sudden absolute blackness, from somewhere above them in the building, muffled but unmistakable, came the sound of an alarm. Then a second sound. Louder. Closer. The sound that Oren didn't have a name for yet, but that made the air in his lungs go cold. And Velas was already on his feet. Here are chapters 6 through 10, continuing directly from where chapter 5 ended. The alarm didn't stop. Climbed. Velas had Oren by the hand before the boy even processed what was happening. One smooth motion, no hesitation, and they were moving up the stairwell, away from the ground floor, away from whatever had just triggered every emergency system in the building simultaneously. Where are we going? Oren's voice was steady. Scared, but steady. Up one level. Then we wait. Wait for what? My brothers. As if the word had called them, the stairwell door one floor above them swung open hard. Kaler. He looked down at Velas. Then at the boy. 1 second of assessment. East corridor is locked down. Security is moving people toward the center of the building. What happened? Blackout wasn't the grid. Kaler's jaw tightened once. Someone cut external power manually. That mattered. That was the difference between an accident and a decision. Velas moved Oren up the remaining steps without another word. On the second floor, emergency lighting had kicked in, red-tinted, low, casting everything in the color of something urgent. Soren was already in the hallway, phone in hand. Expression flat in the specific way it got when he was working 3 problems at once. Brecker's people, he said simply. 2 vehicles in the parking structure. They tracked us here. Kaler didn't react visibly. He processed. How many? 6. Maybe 8. Inside the building? Not yet. They're trying to cut communications first. Oren stood between the 3 of them in the red-lit hallway and looked from face to face. He wasn't crying. He wasn't frozen. He was watching, memorizing. Is my dad okay? He asked. That question hit differently than any of the tactical information, because the ICU was on the 3rd floor, and nobody had checked. Soren was already moving. Down the hall, past a row of closed patient rooms, past a nurse's station running on backup power, toward the stairwell on the far end that connected to the ICU wing. Kaler looked at Velas. Take the boy. Stay on this floor. Northeast waiting room. No windows, 2 exits. Velas nodded. They moved. In the hallway behind them, a security alarm from a different wing joined the first one. 2 alarms now. Different tones. Layered. Outside, muffled through the reinforced windows, there was the sound of vehicles. Then voices. Then the unmistakable flat crack of something that wasn't a car door. Oren heard it. He knew that sound from somewhere. Maybe television. Maybe somewhere real he didn't want to remember. His hand tightened around Velas's. That was a gun. Velas didn't lie to him. Yes. Are people going to get hurt? Pause that was honest. We're going to make sure they don't. The northeast waiting room was small. For chairs. A water cooler. A window that had already been covered by a nurse who'd pulled the blinds without being asked. Good instincts, that one. 3 other people were already in the room. An elderly man in a hospital gown, confused but quiet. A woman holding a toddler who was mercifully asleep. A young nurse who looked like she was holding herself together through sheer professional will. Velas moved the group away from the door side, toward the far wall, instructed them calmly. No drama. No language that would spike the panic already sitting in the room's air. The toddler didn't wake up. Oren sat beside the sleeping child and looked at their face. Small, trusting. The way children look when they have no reason yet to be anything else. He held Grayson tighter. Outside the building, the sounds continued, then stopped. All at once. Complete silence. Which was worse. Silence after gunfire means one of two things. Either it's over, or it's about to begin. Velas positioned himself at the door. His phone lit up once in his hand. A single message from Kaler. 3 words. Oren watched his expression. Whatever the 3 words said, the tension in Velas's shoulders dropped 3 degrees. Not gone, but shifted. He looked back at the boy. Kaler has control of the situation. Oren exhaled. One long, slow breath. He does that a lot? Takes control of things? Yes. Is he good at it? Something crossed Velas's face. Not amusement exactly. Recognition. He's the best at it. The lights came back on. Full power. The alarms cut simultaneously. The room exhaled. The nurse near the window pressed a hand to her own chest and laughed once. A short, relieved, slightly shaky laugh. The elderly man in the gown asked if someone could call his daughter. The toddler stirred, blinked, and went back to sleep like nothing had happened. Oren looked at the ceiling as the fluorescent lights buzzed back to life. Then he looked at Velas. I want to see my dad. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. Velas studied him for 1 second, then nodded. They walked out of the northeast waiting room and into the corridor. Down the hall, toward the stairwell, toward the 3rd floor, toward the ICU. And Oren didn't notice, not until they were almost to the stairwell door, that somewhere between the alarm and the silence and the lights coming back on, he had stopped being afraid. He was still scared, but it was different now. He wasn't alone in it. Then the stairwell door opened from the other side. Soren stepped through. His expression was the same careful flat it always was. Except, not entirely. There was something underneath it now. Something working hard to stay composed. He looked at Velas and said the thing that pulled the floor out from under the moment. Arden's monitor flatlined. Oren was already running. He didn't wait for permission. Didn't wait for a hand to hold or a voice to tell him it was okay to move. His sneakers hit the stairwell steps and he was up and through the ICU door before either Soren or Velas could close the distance behind him. The ICU hallway was chaos in the controlled, clinical way that hospitals manufacture when something goes wrong fast. 3 nurses moving with purpose. A crash cart being wheeled. A doctor in scrubs issuing instructions in a low, rapid voice. Oren saw the room number on the chart outside the door. Room 307. He pushed through. A nurse caught him at the doorway. Sweetheart, you can't be in here. That's my dad. His voice didn't break. It went harder. That's my dad and I'm not leaving. She held him at the door. He didn't fight her. He looked past her arm at the bed. At the monitors. At his father's face. Pale. Still. But the flat line on the screen had moved. It was beeping again. Slow. Irregular. But there. The doctor stepped back from the bed and spoke to the nurse beside him. Vasovagal response to the medication adjustment. We caught it fast. He exhaled. He's stable. For now. For now. Those 2 words did something specific to Oren's chest. Not relief. Relief plus the shadow of everything that came after for now. The nurse who had been holding him at the door felt the boy go still. She loosened her grip, looked at his face, then made a decision. She stepped aside. He walked in, slowly, up to the side of the bed. His father's hand was on top of the blanket. Oren put his hand on top of it. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Grayson pressed against his chest with his free arm, holding his father's hand with the other. The machines beeped steadily. Outside the room, in the hallway, Kaler arrived. He'd come up from the ground floor. His coat was different, or rather, it had a small tear at the left shoulder that hadn't been there before. He looked through the glass panel of the room, at the boy standing beside the bed, at the small hand over the large one. He stood in the hallway for a long time, said nothing. Soren came and stood beside him. Then Velas. 3 men. 1 window. The thing none of them said out loud was the thing all 3 of them were feeling. It had a shape to it. Not guilt exactly. Closer to accountability. The kind that settles in when you realize that a situation you could have prevented was allowed to run this far. Arden had disappeared 7 years ago to protect them. That was the information Soren had pulled. Not suspicion. Not assumption. Documented correspondence. Encrypted, buried, routed through 4 separate channels, but there. 2 months after the summit, Arden had uncovered a data trail connecting 3 city officials to the rival faction that had been trying to dismantle the Dreven organization from inside the legal system. He had the evidence. He had the names. He had the means to deliver it publicly. And instead of using it, he had hidden it, contacted no one, taken his small savings, relocated, disappeared into ordinary life. Because delivering that information openly would have started a war. And a war had casualties. And he had decided, alone, quietly, without being asked, that the people he had met during those 3 days were worth protecting even at the cost of his own stability. He had been 24 years old. Kaler stared through the glass at the boy standing beside the bed. He was just a kid, he said quietly, not speaking to either brother, just speaking. Soren didn't answer. Velas looked at Kaler's profile. He was the same age Oren is now going to be in 18 years. That landed differently. Kaler looked at his brother, then back through the glass. Oren hadn't moved, still standing, still holding the hand. The monitor beeped. Slow, steady, staying. Kaler pressed one hand flat against the glass panel. It was the closest thing to a gesture he had. And then the doctor came back into the hallway. His face was composed, but his eyes said he had something to deliver. He looked at the 3 men. Then at the room behind the glass. He exhaled once. He's stable. The next 6 hours are critical. But he paused in the specific way doctors pause when they're choosing whether to say the full thing. He's fighting hard. That boy in there, he's the reason. People fight harder when there's someone waiting. He moved down the hallway to the next room. And Kaler stood at that glass panel until Oren finally turned from the bed and looked up. Looked at the window. Saw the 3 men standing there. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just looked. And didn't look away. Neither did they. Then something shifted in the boy's face. Something small. Barely visible. But real. He turned back to his father. Adjusted Grayson in his arms. And settled in to wait. For 6 hours if that's what it took. Arden opened his eyes at 4:17 in the morning. Not dramatically. Not gasping. Just open. Like a door unlocking quietly. The first thing he saw was the ceiling. White tiles. Fluorescent light turned low for the night hours. The soft, persistent sound of the monitor beside him. The second thing he saw was his son. Oren was asleep in the chair beside the bed. Head dropped forward. Grayson tucked under one arm. The crackers, still unopened, in his lap. Arden stared at his son for a long time. The way you look at something you almost lost. Slowly, carefully, making sure it's real. He tried to move his hand toward the boy and found it already connected. His hand. Oren's hand. The boy had fallen asleep holding it. Had not let go even in sleep. Something moved across Arden's face. Complicated. Private. The kind of feeling that doesn't have a name but lives in the specific space between relief and grief and love so large it has no edges. He looked toward the door and froze. 3 men in the hallway, standing in the low blue light of the hospital corridor at 4 in the morning. Awake, still, watching the room. 7 years. That was the first thought. 7 years and they were right here, right outside the door. His chest tightened. Not from the pneumonia, from something older. The nurse had told him, before he lost consciousness, that 3 men had arranged his transfer to the ICU. He hadn't registered what that meant. Not fully. Now he was looking at them. And he registered it completely. Kaler saw the moment Arden's eyes found them. He didn't move. Soren and Valis held still as well. Waiting. Arden looked at his sleeping son. Then back at the 3 men. Then, slowly, with the careful economy of someone who had very little physical strength and was choosing where to put it, he raised one hand. Not beckoning. Not waving. Just up. Come in. Kaler pushed the door open quietly. They moved inside. Not crowding. Spreading out. Giving the room air. Arden's voice came out rougher than he intended. You shouldn't be here. Neither should your son. Kaler said it without heat. But here we are. Arden exhaled. Looked at Oren again. He's okay? He's fine. He handled himself better than most adults would have. A breath. Something between a laugh and a wince. He does that. Arden looked at his son's sleeping face. Gets it from his mother. Nobody asked. Nobody pushed. Arden turned back to them. His eyes were clearer than they should have been for a man who had been in surgery 12 hours ago. You read my file. Soren didn't deny it. Yes. The genetic panel. Yes. Arden held Soren's gaze. I knew when Oren was 18 months old. The markers showed up in a routine pediatric workup. He paused. I had already been gone for over a year by then. Kaler was very still. You were going to tell us. It was not a question. Arden looked at him for a long time. I was going to tell you. Then I found out what Hollis and his people were doing to your organization from inside the legal structure. He stopped. Let the name sit. I had enough to bring it down. I also had enough to understand what bringing it down publicly would cost. So you buried it, Valis said. I buried it. Routed the files somewhere they'd survive without me. And I disappeared. He looked at the ceiling once. I told myself it was the right thing. For everyone. It was, Kaler said. It cost my son a stable life. The room held that. No argument. No contradiction. Just the weight of a choice made by a young man alone with no good options. Soren sat down in the chair by the window. He took off his glasses. Cleaned them. A thing he did when he was thinking something through. The files you hid. He looked up. Where are they now? Safe. Arden met his eyes. Still intact. I kept them updated. Kaler looked at him. For 7 years you kept updating files you never used. For 7 years I kept them ready in case you needed them and couldn't reach me. Arden's voice was flat and direct. Because I made a choice about your lives and I figured the least I could do was maintain the tools to protect them. Silence. The monitor beeped. Oren shifted in his chair. His grip tightened slightly on his father's hand even in sleep. Valis watched the boy. Watched the way Arden's face changed when he looked at his son. Then he looked at Kaler. And Kaler was watching the same thing. The same expression. The same quiet recognition. None of them said it aloud yet. They didn't have to. Because Arden said something else first. Something that changed the shape of the room entirely. I knew about the markers for 6 years. His voice dropped. And I kept it from him. He looked at Oren. His son. Sleeping. Unaware. He deserved to know where he came from. His jaw tightened once. That was wrong of me. Whatever happens next. That part was wrong. Nothing happened fast. That mattered. because every important thing in this story could have been forced. The truth could have been delivered like a verdict. Legal teams could have been called. Claims could have been filed. Rights asserted. Power leveraged. None of that happened. What happened instead was slower and real. Arden was in the hospital for 11 more days. Recovery from sepsis-complicated pneumonia doesn't move quickly, and the doctors made sure he understood that. Rest, medication, monitoring, no decisions. The Dreven brothers arranged a private recovery room for the remainder of the stay. No discussion about it. No invoice. It simply happened. Oren was enrolled temporarily in a school 3 blocks from Mercy General, so he didn't lose too many days. Soren handled the paperwork. He didn't explain to the school administration who he was or why he was involved. He simply ensured it was correct, complete, and processed without delay. Velis drove Oren to and from school each day in a black car that the boy initially regarded with deep suspicion. "You're not my dad," Oren told him on the first morning. "No," Velis agreed. "So you don't have to do this." "I know." A pause. "Then why are you?" Velis looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Because your dad asked me to." Oren thought about that for the rest of the drive. He didn't ask again. After school, he would go to the hospital and sit with Arden. He told his father everything. The school, the drive, the car, Grayson's loose ear, which one of the nurses had quietly stitched back during the second night without being asked. Arden listened to all of it, every detail, the way parents listen when they know they almost weren't there to hear any of it. In the evenings, sometimes one of the brothers would come by. Not all 3, usually just one. Soren brought paperwork one night. Nothing dramatic, just Arden's own documents that needed updating, insurance forms that had lapsed, a few administrative things that had piled up during months of overwork and illness. He sat in the corner chair and worked through them systematically while Arden slept and Oren watched television with the volume low. At some point Oren looked over at Soren and said, without looking away from the screen, "You're good at fixing things." Soren glanced up. "What kind of things?" "Paper things." "Problems. My dad gets stressed about paper things." Soren looked at the form in his hand. "He shouldn't have to handle these alone. He always has." Another pause. "He won't anymore," Soren said. Oren looked at him for one long second, then back at the television. He didn't say anything else, but he moved slightly in his chair, just slightly, toward Soren's side of the room. The weeks after Arden's discharge moved differently. He recovered at a quiet apartment the brothers had arranged. Better than the one he'd been renting. No obligation attached to it. No strings. Just space to heal. Oren slept in a real bedroom for the first time in 2 years. He didn't say that out loud. Arden knew anyway. The 3 brothers came for dinner one evening in the 2nd month. Kaler brought food he'd had sent from a place he knew Arden could handle. Nothing rich, nothing heavy, just real food made carefully. They sat around a table that was too small for 5 people and managed anyway. Oren talked through almost the entire meal. About school. About a project on weather systems. About the fact that Grayson had now been repaired twice and was structurally stronger than before. Kaler listened to all of it with the same expression he'd had in the hospital the first night. The one that wasn't a smile but was close to one. After dinner Oren helped clear the plates. He handed each one to Velis, who washed. A rhythm they had developed without planning it. Arden watched from the table. He and Kaler sat across from each other. The conversation between them was quiet. Not heavy. Not resolved. Just moving forward. That was all it needed to be right now. Moving forward. Park visits started in the 3rd month. Saturday mornings. Oren ran ahead on the path while the 4 of them walked behind. Soren eventually stopped pretending he was only there for logistical reasons. Velis stopped pretending the Saturday mornings were anything other than what they were. Kaler had stopped pretending the earliest night He sat outside room 307 and pressed his hand against the glass. This was the hardest part of the story to describe, because it wasn't dramatic. There was no ceremony, no formal declaration, no moment where someone said the word and everyone agreed. It just built, day by day, week by week, the way real things build, not because anyone planned it perfectly, but because everyone kept showing up. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the ones who stay long enough for you to stop waiting for them to leave. Oren had stopped waiting. He just didn't know yet how to say it out loud. He was working up to it. One evening in the 4th month, he sat beside Velis on the couch while his father and Kaler talked in the kitchen. Soren was reading in the armchair. The apartment was warm. The television was off. Oren had Grayson in his lap. He looked at the wolf's repaired ear, the new button eye, the body that had been held together with an old sweater and stitched again by a nurse and carried through one of the worst nights of his life without falling apart. He looked at Velis, then across the room at Soren, then toward the kitchen, where he could hear his father laughing at something. His father, laughing. He hadn't heard that in a long time. He turned back to Velis, and quietly, in the voice he used when he was being most serious, he asked the question that stopped the room. "Are you my forever now?" Nobody answered immediately. That was okay. Oren had learned by now that the answers that mattered took longer. Quick answers were easy. Real ones needed to be meant. Soren had looked up from his book. Kaler had appeared in the kitchen doorway. Arden stood just behind him, watching. His expression was the complicated one. The one with too many feelings in it to separate out cleanly. Velis looked at the boy beside him, at the wolf in his lap, at the question sitting honest and open in the air between them. He looked at his brothers. Kaler came out of the kitchen. He crossed the room. He lowered himself down in front of Oren, the same way he had on the first night. Same crouching position. Eye level. Soren closed the book, stood, moved to stand beside Kaler. Velis shifted forward. And the three of them looked at this boy, 6 years old, stuffed wolf in his arms, question still waiting for its answer. Kaler spoke first. Yes. Simple. One word. No conditions. No qualifications. No agenda underneath it. Soren added his yes. Velis, who had been there from the stairwell on the worst night, who had sat beside this child on cold concrete steps and promised they weren't there to take his family. Yes. Oren looked at all three of them. Then he looked back at his father. Arden hadn't moved from the kitchen doorway. His arms were crossed. His jaw was tight. Not unhappy. The opposite of unhappy. The kind of face someone makes when they are trying to hold something in because the room doesn't have room for the size of the feeling. He uncrossed his arms, walked over, sat beside his son, put his arm around the small shoulders, and Oren leaned into his father's side like he'd been doing since he was old enough to reach. The apartment was quiet for a moment. The good kind of quiet. The kind that happens when everything that needed to be said has been said. 1 year later, different park, bigger. A Saturday in late spring with light coming through the trees in the specific way light comes through trees when the season has finally decided to commit. Oren was running, ahead of everyone, the way he always ran. Slightly too fast, completely unbothered, arms out wide at certain points for no apparent reason except that he felt like it. Arden walked beside Kaler. They talked. Not about the corruption case that had been handled 6 months ago, quietly, through channels that left no public record and dismantled the Hollis network from the inside out. Not about the organization. Not about anything heavy. Just talked. The way people talk when they've had enough of the hard things and decided today is not one of those days. Soren and Velis walked behind them. Soren had both hands in his pockets. Velis was watching the boy. He did that often. Not with concern anymore. Just watching. The way you watch something good. Oren looped back. ran straight at them, hit Kaler at full speed with absolutely no warning and grabbed both his arms to keep from bouncing off. Kaler absorbed the impact without moving. "You're going to knock someone over one day." "Not you," Oren said confidently. "No, not me." The boy looked up at him, then at Soren, then at Valus, then back at his father. Something in his face settled. The way children look when the thing they were most afraid of losing has stayed long enough that the fear has finally, fully, gone. "This is my family," he said. Not a question, not testing it, just saying it out loud, because the truth was more real when you gave it a voice. Arden put a hand on the back of his son's head. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Oren took off running again, back down the path, arms out. The afternoon light caught him and made him briefly gold. The 4 men who remained standing watched him go, and none of them needed to say anything, because some things don't need to be announced. They just need to be lived. The narrator leaves you with this. The smallest voice in a room full of power can change the course of everything. Not because the room was waiting for it, but because the voice refused to stay quiet. One boy, one shout, one question asked twice, once in fear, once in certainty, and an entire family built from the answer. None of them knew yet how much bigger that family was about to become. But that is a story for another day. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you what real courage looks like, or what family can mean when the world defines it too narrowly, leave a comment below and tell us what it meant to you. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Every story here is built for people who believe in second chances, found family, and the quiet strength it takes to stay. Share this with someone who needs to know they are not alone. And come back, because the next story starts right where this one left off.